Well, hey, everybody, it's Pastor Martin. Grateful that you've joined me today on today's podcast, Let's Say Something. We're going to be talking about church shootings today, so come on in and let's talk about it. I'll be right back. Well, hey, everybody, Pastor Martin here. Thank you for joining me on today for today's podcast, Let's Say Something. You know, a lot of times we are silent on a lot of things, a lot of things that come across, a lot of things that happen. We don't have discussions and conversations about certain things, and they just sort of pass by, and we move from one event to another event, or one thing that happens to another thing, and we really never discuss it or talk about it. But today, let's say something. We want to talk about it today. You know, we have entered into 2020, and of course, in 2019, the last few days of 2019, they had church shootings. Matter of fact, I believe it was the last Sunday in 2019 when the shooting took place. I think that was the 29th, if I'm not mistaken. And they had a church shooting there in White Settlement, Texas, there at the West Freeway Church of God, a shooting there, deadly shooting on a Sunday morning from a person that was visiting, was not a member of the church, but was a visitor, and from my understanding had visited many, many times. And such a tragic event. 2 lives were lost, and certainly we always keep those in prayer that are involved in things and their families, and the devastation, and also to that church and those that have to deal with it, because this was not an event that took place after a service was over. It took place right while the service was taking place. Matter of fact, while it was being live streamed, it was a deadly shooting. And according to the pastor, this gunman had grew angry in past times over money requests that he did not get, and he had visited multiple times, and the minister had dealt with him and talked with him. And so when he came this particular Sunday, he came, and there was shooting here and things that took place. It is something to think about and to behold of how this particular person, a 43-year-old man, killed those persons in church. According to the report, he was wearing a fake beard, a wig, a hat, and a long coat, and opened fire and killed Richard White and also Tony Wallace. And so certainly our prayers go out to those families, and also to West Freeway Church of Christ in Texas. Now, I want to say that this is a conversation I think we should have. There's been great debate and argument on whether churches should have armed security, whether they should have security guards in churches. And we've seen on many occasions in the last couple of years where churches have been targeted, people have been killed. Remember a young man that came to Bible study and killed several people, others that were killed outside. The gunman never entered the church. He just started shooting from the outside. We've had those that have come to church with knives and all type of things with the intent to do some harm or to do whatever. And so just the mere fact that this man brought a gun in and dressed that way sort of would give you pause to have suspicion of his dress and the way he came in, and the possibility that he was going to be doing something. My understanding that he was one that had a arrest record going back 2009 for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and in 2013 for theft of property, and was arrested also in 2011 in Oklahoma. And so it sort of makes you wonder if he should have been out at all, or whether some judge or somebody, or whether he fell through the system thinking that he would not do anything that would cause harm to anybody. And so these are things I think we need to talk about as we get back into not so much of a debate, but whether churches should allow armed security in their churches, or whether the members should be armed, or whoever should be permitted to carry. And even in establishments, we see sometimes in today's establishments, when you go into eating places, they say no guns allowed on the premises. And but those rules, those of us that follow those rules, we follow them, but then there are others that don't follow them at all. And so if someone comes into that establishment with a gun and starts shooting or something because we are not permitted to carry our guns in there, or we're trying to follow the rules, it puts us at a disadvantage. Thankful that this church had security, armed personnel, and security that were in their church, those that were carriers. And within 6 seconds or 7 seconds, the gunman was shot dead and killed, because in watching the video, probably more and more people would have died had not they had that security in there. And then there were a lot of older people in there that could not move as fast. So, and him having a shotgun, a sawed-off shotgun, looked like we just never know what type of damage or how many lives would have been lost. So we thank God for those that had security, and we thank God for Jack Wilson, 71, that was the one that fired the fatal shot to take down the perpetrator. And it was just a good thing that he was there, armed and ready, and was accurate with his shot, because I'm sure more lives would have been lost. And so let's have this conversation today on this podcast. Let's talk about this, because I think it's important that we talk about it. Now, for those of you that are familiar with history, we've seen this back in the day, before we had social media, before there were things that we had today. Of course, we've got social media, Facebook, YouTube, and live streams, and all those things that we can look immediately at stuff, and things can be presented. But in 1974, June 30th of 1974, Dr. Martin Luther King's mother was killed on a Sunday morning while playing the organ at church. Had just finished playing the Lord's Prayer. And I think her name is Alberta King. She was killed at age 69 in church, right in Atlanta. And that was many, many years ago. The young man killed, I believe his last name was Chestnut. And he died in prison, of course, at 44. He was younger when he committed the crime. She was killed 6 years after her son was assassinated, Dr. Martin Luther King. You can Google that and find paper clips on it, and find news reports on that particular shooting back in 1974, June 30th, 1974. Dr. Martin Luther King's mother was killed right there on the organ, playing in the service. And not only her, but a deacon was killed also. So we see that this is something that we now have to deal with, of course, when we have legislators that possibly under the finger of the NRA and those with about guns and gun control. And I believe that if you got some sense and you're permitted to carry, that's fine. But we live in a day that the criminals and those that get guns illegally or whatever, they don't follow the rules. No matter who put the rules out there, they do not follow rules. They do not follow rules. Do you hear me? They do not follow rules. And so we've got to have that conversation, because when you come into a place like church, think about it. If you go to a arena, if you go to a basketball game or a football game, even a political event, they would not allow you to carry weapons, whether they're guns or knives or mace or whatever. They will not allow you to carry those things in. I remember years ago when President Bill Clinton came to visit our denomination in Memphis, and they bust us in, not from, he came to Mason Temple. They would not let us into the parking lot. You couldn't park in there, but they bust us from a certain location. And when they got there, they had security in the parking lot, and you couldn't go in but so many ways. I think it was one way or two ways in, and they had metal detectors and those things, and they were confiscating fingernail files and everything. Now, note now, you may have been sitting way up in the balcony, but that didn't matter. They were confiscating fingernail files and other things that they thought would be any harm to the president at that time. And so, same way it is when you go into sporting events and other things, they have metal detectors and things. Even in some schools, they have them where you can not just go in and take anything that they feel would be a threat. They sort of move it out the way. And so it's the same thing when you talk about church. We get into this conversation of whether we should have guns in church or weapons in church or armed security. If you ask me, as being a pastor, I think every church should probably do it according to how they feel comfortable. But I also know that those that come to church that come for illegal purposes or to do something, they follow no rules. They don't care if you got a sign that says no weapons, and they're bringing them, they're bringing them. So in my case, I believe we should, if you went through the proper procedures and got a permit to carry, I believe you should be able to do that to protect those that are in your congregation. I believe and I know that the Lord protects us, but I also know that we're dealing in a day that we have to be prepared for those things that take place and come around us. And so I believe we should. That's, and there may be some of you that may disagree when you hear this, and I don't have a problem with you disagreeing. I respect your opinion by all means, but I'm just saying, for me, I think that it's important. I am a pastor, but I do have a carry permit. I do carry. What somebody say you do? Yes, I do. I carry when I don't leave home. I'm like the commercial, don't leave home without it. I don't leave home without it. I carry, because you just never know what situation you're going to be in. And so I have a permit to carry. I've never had to use it, thank God, but I do have a permit to carry. And sometimes if I go to my church and I'm the way my church is and where it is, if I go to my church and I'm there alone or whatever, you have people that come up and down the street. You got people, you never know what people are going to do. So I'm always mindful of the fact that you just have to be in a position to protect yourself. And it's better to have that position to be able to do that. And so I feel it's important. I know there are churches that they don't have anything. Then I know there are churches that they don't allow people to bring weapons in, but they do have armed security. They do have people that's in the church. They're like the air marshals on the flights. You never know who they are, but they are positioned in a way. Now, one of the things that I think that's important for us to understand with this church shooting, this man came in disguise. He was not a person that just came. He came dressed a certain way with a disguise. According to the report, the Texas Department of Public Safety said that he was wearing a fake beard, a wig, a hat, and a long coat. And so when you think about it, especially in Texas, I'm sure that it wasn't cold. And if it wasn't cold in Texas, for him to come in with a long coat somehow should give you pause. If he came in a place where it was snowing and it was cold, then that's different. But it's almost like when you see people walking around with hoodies on in the middle of the summer, or walking around with a large, long trench coat, a heavy coat in the middle of summer, and they come into your establishment. Sometimes it gives you to just take note. And I think in church, and not just in church, but we're talking about church shooting today, I think that we should be very mindful. We should always be on alert, no matter where we are, to watch those that are coming in. Not that we want to put suspicion on everyone, but we want to be able to watch everyone as they come in to see what they're doing, what's going on. I think it's important for us to do that. A lot of times, when we in church and different places, of course, we're praising and giving him praise. And then the people that visit our church, we never know what their motives are. So you've always got to have someone that won't praise, but will watch. The Bible says watch and pray. So you need someone that will watch. And so you keep an eye on different people when they come in, especially if they look suspicious. Now, they may not be there to do anything, but that's not a chance that we should take. We should always be watching him. And in this case, I think the young lady of one of the men that were killed said that her father, the one that was killed, said that the guy looked suspicious. And I think she was the one said, well, maybe Dad, he's just here to, to do something. And I think she said it or he said it. I can't remember which one, but they just said they just think he maybe hear him something. But they did have a reason to look at him. Now, if someone comes into an establishment or a church and they look suspicious, and you have people that are armed, the people that are licensed to carry, you may want to go through some type of training to have them positioned in a certain place, to be in place just in case someone is there to do ill will or ill harm to someone in church. Same way it is outside. A church is an open venue, basically, and it's free to all that come. I'd hope we never get to the day that we will have to have metal detectors for people coming in church. I would hope we never get to that day, but you just never know. And so we're looking at that. We're wondering what's taking place, what's going on. And so we've got to get to the place that we start looking to see what is happening, what's going on, how do we deal with this. And this is a conversation that I think we need to have. There are those that say no, there are those that say yes, but at the end of the day, the reality of it is that we have church shootings, and we've had quite a few in the last 2 to 3 years. We've had quite a few church shootings. We've had quite a few that took place doing Bible study, in worship, outside of churches. This one took place right in the Sunday morning service. Now, if they would have had a metal detector, they probably would have been able to detect that he had a shotgun, but they didn't. And he sit there until they got ready to do communion, and then did what he did. Again, we thank God for Mr. Wilson, I believe it is, that was able to fire one shot and stop what could have been a greater tragedy. But it is a conversation that we've got to talk about. Let's say something, whether we can talk to those in the government, in our fields where they make the laws, and those that do those things. We may need to have a conversation, because this right here is very important, and to see it play out, and some type of gun control. We may not can get all of it, but we've got to do a better job when it comes to this some kind of way. So we need to talk about it. This church shooting in White Settlement, Texas, at West Freeway Church of God, it was a tragedy. It could have been way worse. Thank God that it was not worse than it was. And we still, again, pray for those that lost loved ones and family members. And so let's have this conversation. Let's get out and talk about it. I think as I leave today, I want to encourage those of you that are pastors, those of you that go to churches, those of you that have businesses, establishments, or whatever. I want to encourage you to let's start having this conversation. Let's start looking to secure our facilities, to make them secure when people are coming into our services. We want visitors, we want those to come, but by all means, we still want to make sure that those that come, our parishioners, are safe, and those that come to worship are safe. And so we've got to do things, and we've got to start not just inside the church, but we have to start on the parking lot. We got to start outside the church to make sure that we are being watchful and being mindful of those things that are taking place. And so I want you today, let's start having this conversation. Let's start saying something about it. Thank you for joining me for today's podcast. Do me a favor, those of you that download the podcast, do it, share it with someone, make comments. You may agree, you may disagree. We won't fall out about it, but I want you to certainly let's have this conversation about church shootings, and not just church shootings, but shootings in other places, establishments, whether we should or whether we shouldn't carry, whether we should have security, whether we shouldn't have security. No matter which way you go, it's a conversation we need to have. I would love to hear from you. Email me at rrcdmartin@gmail.com and let me know that you want to talk about or enjoyed this podcast concerning the church shootings that took place in White Settlement, Texas, that church shooting. And also, while we're thinking about it, we think about the Kwanzaa, the thing that happened in New Jersey, I believe it is, where the young man killed, I believe it was 9 people, stabbed them. Shooting crime is one thing, but a stabbing crime is a up close and personal crime. And again, you just never know what people are thinking and where they're coming from. And when they get in close proximity of a person, you just never know what they're going to do. And so this is why sometimes people say, well, why y'all got to have security guards? This is a prime example in both cases why you need security sometimes, because people come and you just never know what their motives are. And we have to be able to protect ourselves, to protect the parishioners, to protect the church, to protect those that come to our worship, that they will feel free to be in our worship without feeling that they will be attacked. And especially church and religious things is just not something that you look for. If we need security in political events, if we need security in football, baseball, basketball, and all of those things, certainly we need to think about security in the church. Well, thank you so much again for joining my podcast. I hope to share with you again later. And let's not forget, let's pray for those victims of the White Settlement, Texas shootings at West Freeway Church of Christ. May God bless you, and may all God's best be yours.